The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or to view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
My name is Mark Harvey, and I'm currently teaching a course called Musical Improvisation. And this demonstration is part of that course in collaboration with Mitas. And Phil Scarff is the leader of Natraj, which presented a great concert yesterday. I know some of you were there, but if you weren't there, maybe you'll be able to hear Natraj again in another setting. And so Ravikiran is the other presenter. He'll be coming a little bit late, but he will be here. So we're going to begin with Phil.
So today's workshop is going to be on application of frameworks from Indian classical music to improvisation and other idioms. Indian classical music, there are two major systems. There are really two different idioms. There's North Indian classical music, which is also called Hindustani music, and there's South Indian classical music, which is also called Carnatic music. So I'm going to be talking about Hindustani music today. And our guest, Chitravina Ravikiran, will be covering Carnatic music after I talk about Hindustani music. So it'll be interesting to see the contrast between the two. So you might want to, pay attention to that. So what we'll do is, you've got a handout. I see people seem to have that, so that's good. So I'm going to talk about a number of things that are outlined on the handout. I'm going to demonstrate some stuff as we go through. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or whatever as we go, because I'd rather take the questions as we go than lose people if I'm going off on a tangent and you don't follow me. Probably other people have similar questions too. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to present an alap in Rag Hansadwani. For those who were at the concert yesterday, we played the piece Red Swan, which is in Rag Hansadwani. So this is sort of ties back to the concert. I'm not going to go too much into nuts and bolts of rags. There'll be a little bit of discussion here and there as needed to cover the frameworks. But this is more about sort of a higher level view of Indian classical music and how the frameworks from that music can be translated to other situations. So I'm going to play an alap, which is an exposition of the rag. It's done kind of solo with no percussion, just melody. And it starts out without meter, and it can evolve into a point where there's sort of an internal meter going on, but there's still no percussion. So what I want you to do is listen to this and pay attention to some of the things like how we're making use of range, note density, rhythmic development, and mainly those things. We'll talk about some other things afterwards, but listen for those things and then we'll discuss them after I finish. Thank you. Okay, so did anybody notice anything about range, the use of range in that performance? Yeah.
It seemed to start in the lower end of the range and slowly build up to include the entire range.
Yeah, that's right. Very good. So, and this is very typical of a Hindustani alap. It starts around the low tonic. It may kind of build into it and work a little bit around it, but the focus is going to be on introducing that tonic and sort of establishing the tonic. Then you can optionally move down, which I did a little bit of, and you can expand the range downward. Then you can start expanding up, and you go up kind of sequentially. It can be note by note, it can be phrase by phrase, but more or less it goes sequentially upwards. And then as you do this development, then the range expands. We're not moving the range, a confined range upward, we're expanding the range. So as this progresses, then we use more and more of the range. We get, and then there's a resolution point at the upper tonic. And then it can optionally continue above that, which I did a little bit of. And then the range again then starts condensing back down and comes back to the saw. And then you can optionally, depending upon the tradition, the performer may decide then to do another section where it goes into a more of a rhythmic presentation. So the time becomes, there's like an internal time going on. And so I did that next. And then, so what other things did people notice? Are there any comments about, say, density of notes? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, not about density of notes,
Yeah.
but I noticed that you only used a few notes of the scale. I think like 4 or 5.
Yeah, that's true. I used 5 notes because this rag only has 5 notes. So yes, it's a pentatonic rag, so only 5 notes are there in the rag. So in most rags, you don't go outside whatever the notes are that are defined as being part of the rag. You don't go outside those. Occasionally, there are some rags, exceptions, where you do, but for the most part, you don't. So that's why I stuck to 5 notes. But you're right about that. Good. That's a good observation. So any observations about note density? How it may have varied or developed or evolved? Or say frequency of notes. How long did the notes last? Yes?
Ones at the top or the bottom of the range were usually longer.
Okay, that's a good observation. When I started out, I was playing much more sustained. When I got up to the high tonic, I also sustained a bit. That's true. And yeah, any other comments? Yes?
But it was progressive. So you started out with long notes, and then you progressively went into faster and more diminutions.
Yes, that's right. So the notes came faster, at a faster pace, the higher density of notes. So started out with fewer notes, much more contemplative kind of playing. And then as this evolved, then the notes came at a more rapid pace, gradually. So that's another thing. So note density is another framework. I forgot to mention. So what I wanted to do is I'm going to talk about each of these frameworks, and I'm going to talk about what is the tradition in Hindustani music, and then also how can we extrapolate the tradition in other ways, maybe changing a parameter here or there to use the same kind of idea, but extrapolate it and make it into something else, and then also apply. You can apply the tradition directly, or you can apply the extrapolation. Any of those things are possible. So, of course, we talked about the range. That can be applied directly to another improvisation in another style, right? But we can also make changes to the range, right? So instead of starting on a low note, we could start on a high note, right? And we could build the range down. Instead of building the range up, we could build the range down. Or maybe we could start with a very wide range and then condense it down and then focus on a note at the end. So there's a lot of different possibilities, things you can do with the range. So that's the framework, and then the idea is you can use the parameters from the tradition, or you can adjust them and make some changes and come up with some new ideas for other improvisations. So the same with note density. So does anybody have any ideas? What could we do with note density that might make it a little different from what you heard just now? Any ideas about what we could do? Instead of starting with long notes and then progressing to short notes and faster lines, what are some other things that one could do in a performance? Yes?
Keep the same density throughout?
Could keep the same density throughout, that's right. That's one option. Any other options you can think of? Yeah.
You could go backwards.
You could do it backwards. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Those are all great ideas. So you could do it backwards. You could start with very fast lines, very rapid notes, very rapid passages, high note density, and then work your way back down to a very, slow, some longer notes, less dense presentation. Right. So then, so another thing is, in Hindustani music, we have a thing called chalan, which refers to things like characteristic phrases that are used over and over in compositions and in improvisation, the kind of thematic material that comes back. And so that can take the form of actual melodic fragments, or it can also be rules like, you may not play a certain note in ascent if you played another note before it, and things like this can also be part of the chalan. So one thing that I was doing, and I'm not sure how apparent this might have been, but some phrases that are common in Hansa Dhwani, first of all, many times we start on the third and end on the second. So you heard me play a lot of phrases that would start on this pitch and end on, so you can do this, or like that. And then there are some characteristic phrases also like this. Those two phrases are very common. Even this. So those things, you heard those coming back over and over again. How obvious they were, I'm not sure, but that's part of the way we present the music. So we can take that idea, and in another context, we could take, like, say, a small melodic fragment and use that as like a little theme that you keep coming back to, right, in the improvisation. So, for example, if you take, let's turn this off. You take a tune, in fact, this happens in compositions quite a bit. So, for example, a jazz piece like Tenor Madness by Sonny Rollins uses a thematic fragment that keeps coming back, and we can also use that as a basis for improvisation. So I'll play that composition and then play a little improv using that kind of fragment that as an idea. You can take those themes, which is a variation, and use that and build an improvisation around that. So that's kind of a sort of an extrapolation of the use of chalan in Hindustani music. Let's see what else here. Okay, now, towards the end, did anybody notice anything different about what I did towards the end of my alap presentation?
You started moving to rhythm?
Yeah, I moved into rhythm, and I also started repeating notes, like. So that's called jala. And even in that case, I started with a repetition. The pulse of the repetition, or the rate of repetition, was on a little bit slower. And then I built it up. I made it faster. And then I made it quite fast towards the end. So even that, there was a note density kind of progression in that presentation as well. So for jala, where we're repeating notes in kind of a rhythmic fashion, does anybody have any ideas about how you might extrapolate? What could you do differently using that kind of concept but changing a parameter or two here or there? Does anybody have any ideas? Yeah?
You can move the notes around rather than repeat the same thing.
You can move the notes around, right. Rather than repeating the same note, you can move the notes around. That's a great idea. And another thought I had was, you could take, instead of repeating them sort of in kind of a more or less equal length, you could vary the length. Like you could say, play a long note and then a shorter note and a shorter note and a shorter, so you condense down the repetition. So maybe like. which is not typically done. Usually when the jala starts, it kind of starts pretty, like a moderate clip. So that's one idea. Or you could even slow it down. You could start very fast and come down to slower speed. So some things that can be done with that too, to change it around. So then one other thing is rhythmic progression, and I think that was already alluded to. But I started out, in kind of a very rubato mode, where I was playing not with really any time implied, and with longer notes. And then as the note density increased, after a while, I went into a time and started playing lines that were in time, but kind of at a moderate clip. And then after that, I went into the jala, and the jala built up to a much faster internal speed. So there was a progression of rhythmic ideas as well, which, again, we can change parameters on that. You could start with a very fast rhythm and move to a slower rhythm or something like that, or you could be in time and then go out of time. That kind of thing can be used. Okay, now another thing that can be done, or another thing that is done, another framework is called bistar. And in bistar, what we do, it's like the beginning of the alap, where we're playing rubato style, but it's done over time. So this would be after the composition is introduced and after the percussion comes in, and there's a rhythmic cycle going on at a certain speed. The performer may elect to play in that speed, which would be very obvious, right? But then you can also go out of time. While the time's going on, you can play out of time on top of that. That's called bistar. I guess I won't try to demonstrate that right now, but that's another idea that can be used. And let's see what else. Okay, then there's a technique called gut curry. And the gut means the composition, and curry means like play. So you play with the composition is basically what it means literally. So in this case, now I haven't played the composition yet. So what I'll do is I'll play for you now just the first line of a simple composition in Hansa Dwani. And this is in a 16-beat cycle. So in the tradition, what can happen is you can take a line of the composition, and in that cycle of 16 beats, you play part of the cycle, you play the composition, and then for part of the cycle, you improvise. So for example, you could play the first 8 beats of the composition and then improvise for 8 beats. That adds up to 16, and then you keep repeating that. So it stays aligned with the cycle of the composition. So I'll just demonstrate a little of that right now. That's an idea that's called gut curry, or a framework. And now, one thing we could do to change it up, well, let me ask you, what ideas do you have? What could be done? What can you think of any ideas of how you might change a parameter to make it different? Any thoughts? Yes, go ahead.
Rather than coming back to the first half, come back to the second half?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So you can even come back to different points in the composition. So you might the first time through the cycle, maybe you improvise on the last 8 beats. Then maybe next time you start on beat 5, and maybe you go for 4 beats, and then you come back to the composition. So you could do that. You kind of mix it up and improvise, come in and out, improvise in different sections. That would be a way to extrapolate that. Okay, and now there's another framework called Lai Curry, and Lai has to do with the rhythm. And again, curry is like play. So this is like rhythm play. So in this framework, what is done is the performer will play different rhythmic patterns or rhythmic combinations to there's more emphasis on rhythm in this particular framework. So I've given in the handout, I've given a few examples, but basically, let's take the 16-beat cycle. This might, I think it might make sense if we have people clap for this. 1 second. I'll show you a clapping pattern. So in this rhythmic cycle, which is called teen tal, the typical clapping pattern is pretty simple. It goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 1. So we're clapping every 4 beats, and the third clap is done as a wave or upside down. You flip your hand over. So everybody do this with me. 1, let's see. I'll just count 4 beats and we'll start at the beginning of the cycle. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 1, 2, 3, 4. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, good. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is, do you do that clapping pattern while I play? So we keep the time going. So I'm going to do, what I'll do is I'll play a few rhythmic combinations, and I'll play some of them, slowly, like using quarter notes essentially, just so you can hear more easily how they work. And I'll play some faster also, more like eighth notes, so you can it'll give you a little more sense of how it might be performed. I'll start off with simple ones and make it a little more complicated as I go. So if I give you 4 beats, and I'll probably play the composition once or twice just to get started, but I'll give you 4 beats and we'll start the clapping, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. So that's some examples of different ways you can set the rhythm. You can also leave out, in these patterns. Oh, actually, let me play 1 or 2 more. So there's one, for example, if you take the one where I did 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, and 4, altogether comes out to 16. So I did 3, 3, 3, 3, 4. So what you can do is, if you leave out the first note in each set, it's like a variation. So let's do the clapping pattern again. 1, 2, 3, 4. First I'll play the whole thing, then I'll leave out the note. Hard to hear line up the clapping with the improvisation there, but that was the idea. And so you can take that thing. Now, does anybody have any ideas for how to extrapolate that? Yes?
You could, rather than be in just a 16-beat cycle, go further.
Yeah, sure. That's absolutely. You could do 2 cycles. You could do whatever. Yeah, that's true. You can make it a longer pattern. I'll say that's probably that would be probably considered to be part of the tradition. It's not really exactly an extrapolation outside the tradition, but yes, that's a great idea. So something to think about. This one, I haven't really come up with any brilliant ideas for how to extrapolate this, but I'm sure that in this room there's enough mental capacity to think of some other ways of doing this. So I'll leave that to you to think about. Okay, now a few other examples. There's a technique called tons, or a framework called tons, which are basically fast lines. And there are different ways to build tons. So I'm going to demonstrate a few of those. So first of all, you can use just a limited number of notes, like say 3 or 4 notes, to construct tons. So then it's like in a confined range, and you're playing sort of a rapid passage. So something like this. Something like that, confined range. Then, you know, so what could we do with that? Well, we could, I'm going to kind of move along because we need to switch over to Ravikiran in a couple of minutes. So some ideas there. You could take some tones. Now notice I used all adjacent tones in the scale. So you could take some non-adjacent tones, you know, maybe 3 non-adjacent tones, maybe put with larger intervals in between and use those instead. Something like that is a way to extrapolate that. Then we have tones that expand and contract. So let me play an example of that. So. There I started low, I expanded up to the upper, a little bit above the high tonic, and then came back down again. So expanding, contracting, you can contract, expand, those kind of things. You know, some ideas for how to extrapolate that. Okay, instead of going in sequence, you know, maybe you go out of sequence. So instead of sort of sequentially expanding, maybe you start with a small range, then go to a large range, then maybe a medium range, and then even a bigger range or something like that. So you kind of mix it up. It's an idea to for extrapolating that. Then we have a type of ton which is called a palta ton. Here we take a short melodic fragment and repeat it going up and down the scale, making any necessary adjustments to accommodate the chalan. So, for example, if we take a simple pattern like this, 3 notes, we can make a ton out of that. So I'll just demonstrate how that works. So something like that. Now that could be extrapolated by, you know, maybe instead of going up in a scalar fashion, you go up in intervals. Like you go up like in some sort of arpeggio, or maybe instead of picking adjacent notes, you pick notes that have intervals in between, and then you take that pattern and move it up and down the scale. Things like that can be done to extrapolate. Then finally, another type of ton, which is frequently used to kind of conclude a segment. So if we've been doing these other types of tons, confined range, expanding, contracting, palta tons, different things like this, we may choose to conclude that segment by just playing a straight ton. It goes straight up or straight down. Pretty simple. Something like that, or to kind of conclude a segment, that's usually used. So that's pretty much the end of my part of the presentation. Are there any other questions before we move on to our guest? Okay, yes, go ahead.
Well, could you chromaticize what you're doing?
Yes, absolutely.
With ornamentation?
Oh, yeah.
And
You can, yeah, absolutely, yeah. You can chromaticize it, you can, I mean, this can be applied to anything, right? So you could do anything chromatically, you could go to use chord progressions, you know, you could do, it can be, you know, free form, you can move all around, yeah. Anything can be done to extrapolate. It's really it's a wide open scenario, yeah. Yes?
What's the instrument that plays the background?
Oh, this is an electronic tambura, which takes the place of the real tambura, which is a stringed instrument, which is used to provide a drone. In Indian classical music, we always have a drone going on while the music is happening.
And is it this resonant in like the actual tambura?
Yeah, it is very, it's really, yes, quite resonant, yes. Yeah, yes.
This might be slightly off topic, but how do you compare, like, what are the similarities and difference between like chord progressions in jazz versus using a raga in Indian music?
Right. So the two idioms are very similar in a lot of ways, and so the way I would say you compare a chord progression to Indian music in let's say jazz, right? That's what you're talking about. So in a jazz composition, you'll have a fixed length, like it might be 32 bars, for example, and it has a particular chord progression that lasts for that 32 bars, and then the cycle begins again, and it keeps on cycling through, right? So in Indian classical music, the analogy is you have the tal, which is the rhythmic cycle, And that rhythmic cycle has a specific structure which goes on for whatever number of beats. It may be 16 beats, such as teen tal, which we got very slight introduction to today. And that keeps repeating over and over. So the tal becomes the structure. And the tabla, in my interpretation here, is the tabla, which is the percussion that would perform the tal, is playing specific strokes. So for example, in teen tal, the strokes go like this. I can verbalize the strokes that would be played on the drum. It goes da, din, din, da, din, din, da, tin, tin, ta, din, din, da. Those are the 16 beats that define teen tal. So those strokes work in an analogous fashion to a chord progression in jazz, so that it defines where you are in the cycle and when you're coming back to the beginning of the cycle. Any other questions? Okay, great. So let's have Ravikiran come up.
Thanks, Phil Scarff.
Yeah. The pitches are they're essentially the same, but they're slightly different because the tuning is not identical. We don't use in Indian classical music. We don't use an even-tempered tuning. So it's sort of related to just tuning, but it's not just tuning either. It depends on the rag. So there's slight differences in the notes depending on the rag, but pretty much it's the same 12 chromatic pitches. Yeah. So for example, one thing that happens is the major third is one of the big discrepancies. In the even-tempered system, the major third is, I think, is 14 cents above the major third that's used in Indian classical music, which is more of a just major third. Yeah. And a similar thing happens to the major seventh because it's related to the fifth. See, the root in the fifth would be justly tuned as opposed to even tempered, right? So then the fifth, being justly tuned from the root, is the major third below the seventh. So the seventh also is much flatter, the natural seventh. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So good afternoon, and can you all hear me? So I think just the introduction that Phil gave towards improvisational techniques in the North Indian system, much of it actually holds good in the South Indian system of Carnatic music as well. Carnatic is probably about 2,000, 2,500 years old system. The origins can be traced back to the era of the Vedas and so forth in India. But somewhere around the line, probably around 1300s, India actually developed two distinct classical systems. This was around the time when there was a lot of Persian guests in the northern parts of India. So a lot of imports happened and a kind of a hybrid culture developed in the northern part of India. That's why the two systems of music, even today, they have a lot of common concepts, common roots, common ideas, common ideals, but the manner in which they have evolved and developed have varied about 700 years down the line. So now the concepts of improvisation, if you can just summarize it, it can either be purely melodic, or it could be melorhythmic, or it could be purely rhythmic. So that's what it boils down to in most systems of music. And so the example that Phil played of the first prelude, like the time cycle bound, but there is no rhythm, where you have like the freestyle improvisation, the pure melodic one, the alapana. He explained to you how beautifully it's organized in a particular manner, from the lower notes to the higher notes and from slow speeds to the faster speeds in Hindustani music. In Carnatic music, in fact, some of the discussions about how it can be extrapolated were happening, I noticed that. But in Carnatic music, many of these things are already applied, in the sense that you don't always start from the lower notes. You have several actual situations where you start from higher notes, or you actually render in faster speeds first and then you just come down and finish with tranquil kind of a feel to it. Or the other possibility which can also happen is the interspersing of this all the time. So, there are times when you just keep interspersing the fast and slow phrases through the improvisation. Now, I will just give an example of that. Can you hear well the instrument? So, here you see higher octave, lower octave, fast, slow, everything happening as the musical dynamics keep evolving during the course of that improvisation. This is very typical in many Carnatic ragas when you do not really start in a slow fashion, but the slow to fast, low to high also holds good in many cases. Probably about 50-60% of the improvisation that we do in Carnatic music, pure improvisation, we do that same kind of development. But there are exceptions like this, but the exception has a good percentage of about 30-40 in Carnatic. So, that is one of the things. And then if you are looking at pure rhythmic improvisation, today we are not having any percussion instruments for me to actually demonstrate that part of it, but it is very, very exciting, very involved and very well defined concepts of rhythm. So, let us actually go to the melorhythmic part of it. Prior to that, I will also give a parallel of what Phil showed in that kind of the Jod and the Jhala kind of improvisation, where we actually do similar kind of development in Carnatic also. It is like there is an element of rhythm, but it is not like cyclic rhythm. This instrument is the Chitravina. Chitravina is like a 20-string slide. As you can all see, the technique of playing this is very, very simple. I am sure that all of you can do this in no time. So, all we do is just slide this on the thing and we get the notes. I will just show this example of non-cyclic rhythm, but still some kind of structured improvisation. This is known as tanam in Carnatic music. It is slightly distinct from the tan that you just heard in Hindustani, where it is more composition based. They also have the composition percussion happening in that kind of thing, but here it can be without the percussion also. kind of thing. So this is like, as you know, you would have noticed there is that element of rhythm, but it's not like a tangible rhythm. So this is like a semi-rhythmic kind of improvisation. And then we have the composition typically starts. I should also add here that Carnatic music has several times only the composition rendered with no improvisation as well. So there are times when we just only just interpret the composition, because there is a very rich tradition of several kinds of different musical forms which are represented in a typical Carnatic concert. It's almost like Western classical in that sphere, except that there is no harmony to the composition. It's all melodic compositions, and there is a lot of lyrics as well happening in many of them. So many times the improvisation could be optional in many of these compositions, and in certain times when we do, we can have very short improvisation. For example, it could just be like a few seconds of the pure melodic prelude that I just played, and then we just go into the composition, and then we just move into some improvisation around or on top of the compositions. So now I'll just dwell on two types of improvisation that's possible in the melorhythmic manner. So once a piece starts, the percussion joins in, so then we get into the cyclic rhythm. Just like you just had this clapping and finger counting happening in Hindustani, we have the similar kind of structure, but what happens in Carnatic is that you have the percussion not merely keeping time, but they also keep improvising on the composition parallelly to what we are playing sometimes. So when you actually hear it with the percussion, you can have a very different kind of a feel to the thing. But what I'll do now is just demonstrate a simple tala, like a parallel of what the teen tal that you just heard. This 8 counts, so it's known as Adi tala. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's like first a beat followed by 3 finger counts starting from the little finger, and then a beat and a wave of the hand, another beat and a wave of the hand. So you want to try it with me? We can. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is one of the talas. I'll also just demonstrate another simple tala. It's just 3 counts. 1, 2, 3. Just 2 beats and 1 wave of the hand. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So what I'll do is I'll take a composition in this just for contrast, take a small part of this and just show how the improvisation can happen. One of them is with the lyrics, because the composition has lyrics. So a line from the composition is taken and melodically developed, keeping the rhythm and the lyrics constant. Only the melody is skipped, changing. It's distinct from a melodic variation in the context that a melodic variation can still have a lot of closeness to the original line, but here the whole thing can change drastically from the original melody, but you keep coming back to the original refrain of the line that you took for the improvisation. So I'll just take one composition in this tala of 3 counts and just show it to you. So you want to keep time with me? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So this is the main line. Aravinda Patranayanam. So this particular composition is in Sanskrit. Aravinda Patranayanam Govinda Muragashayanam Aravinda Patranayanam. So this line can be then changed. Aravinda Patranayanam Govinda Muragashayanam Aravinda Patra. So when I play in the instrument, I'll try to vocalize those syllables with the kind of plucking that I do. So I keep going back to that, then a new round of improvisation can start. So this kind of improvisation keeps happening. Many times in a typical concert in Carnatic, you will also have a melodic accompaniment, which is 99 out of 100 times a violin. The violin is one of the most common melodic accompanying instruments in Carnatic music. It's also a very often used solo or duo instrument. Since about late 1700s, the violin has been an integral part of Carnatic music in India. So oftentimes when I play, the accompanist will respond to the improvisation in his or her own way, and then I continue. So it's almost like a dialogue and exchange is built up between the main artist and the accompanist during these times. And the percussion, of course, is very dynamic, so they keep having their own fun when this happens. And then the other kind of improvisation that can be possible in a melorhythmic manner in Carnatic is the solfa improvisation. Just like the do, re, mi in Western, there are 7 notes. Fundamentally, they are known as sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni. Those are the 7 names. So many times we use those notes themselves to improvise. Aravinda Patranayanam Sanida Bama Badanida Aravinda. So you just enunciate those notes fast. In a typical instrument, you can just create a stroke for every one of the notes. So it can be just melodic. Sometimes you can have a lot of interesting rhythmic patterns, just like what you just saw. Maybe descending patterns, ascending patterns of notes, or sometimes even kind of patterns. Now I'll just demonstrate some patterns. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I live in, they're just threes. Neither, 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 neither. So these are like even patterns. But if you notice, the song is actually starting, it's like a takeoff after 9 out of 12. That's where this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's where the takeoff point is. So each time you have to be landing correctly on that particular after 9. Whatever improvisation we do, it's like flying an aircraft. You can go all over the place, but unless you land properly, it's going to be, an accident. So you have to really learn how to land correctly on the song in music, in this improvisation. So it's like some of these landing points could be pretty intricate, And then with that intricate points, you can really build a lot of beautiful, interesting mathematical patterns, which can be a lot of fun for the artists themselves and for the listeners as well. Then I'll just demonstrate some small other patterns. So this is like 5 plus 7 plus 9, kind of an ascending pattern. So again, it's like the reverse, like 9, 7, 5 kind of thing. So you can have a lot of things, but everything I'm doing still within this kind of framework of only 4 per beat happening right now. Sometimes if the composition starts on the beat, then you can even change over from 4, you can have 5s or 3s or 7s or 9s or so many other kinds of pulse rate can be changed. So now, for example, if the same song were to be starting in a different point on the beat, that means you are having 5 per beat there. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The tempo has to be still constant, but within that you keep changing the thing. So in Carnatic music, one of the key things which is distinct from Hindustani music is, in Hindustani music, it's legal to accelerate during the course of the composition. So you start and then the composition itself can be accelerated en masse. But in Carnatic, you still need to maintain the basic tempo, but within that you can change the pulse rate and you can show different kinds of speeds. So I think I've covered most of the basic things in this short time. So if you have got any questions, please feel free to. Yes?
Is that the standard way of playing this? So you always pluck with these 2 fingers and sort of mute?
No, I pluck with these 2 actually. The first and the second finger. And this I use sometimes to damp. So now, so I can, if I want more staccato kind of thing. Thumb is generally not so much applied in actual thing. I use a little finger for strumming this drone or rhythm strings. Sometimes the thumb is, actually thumb really should not be, if your technique is good, you don't really use the thumb. In the left hand, I use it to grip with these 3 fingers. And then these 2 are used to dampen any unnecessary vibration from the other side. So otherwise, this finger is a very integral part of good slide technique in my opinion, because if you don't use this, you will end up using, always hearing a sort of monotonous kind of sliding kind of quality to it. Kind of thing. So if you want a very gripping kind of music, sometimes this is very useful to employ.
Is there any underlying difference between the way ragas are described in Hindustani versus Carnatic music?
Well, the concept of the raga structure, I mean, as an entity is the same for both, in the sense that both of them have the same kind of approach, that it's like a melodic formula of ascending and descending notes in a particular sequence and pattern. And even a small change to the sequence, an addition or addition, can make it a different raga. And that's actually the million-dollar question, because in the West, when we think of a major scale, we may think of a lot of variations within that particular sequence. It will still be within the scale, it will still be major scale. But in Indian music, because it's all melodic development, you don't just think of it as one scale. You even a small change in the sequence make it a different raga. It's people actually have asked me about this. A lot of my Western contemporary musicians have come and asked me what is the whole rationale of just changing one note and calling it a different raga or altering sequence. minutely and how does it change the whole thing. The analogy I can give there, it's like a different shade of the same color. You know, if you look at an Adobe Photoshop or something, you just have so many shades of yellow, like a million shades of green. So the similar way, you can have so many different shades of the major scale. So even altering a note here, if you are a capable musician who is well versed in melodic development, then you can really create so many different shades of the same thing just with a small tweak in the sequence. And so that no two sequences will be similar if you are to explore it like that and take it on that path. Just I'll give you an example, small example, but a fairly extreme one. Basic major scale. Now, so here I only change the sequence. You still have all the notes in both ascent and descent. So it creates a sort of a totally different kind of signature tune to this particular raga. So that's a totally different shade of the same major scale. It can be a very bouncy kind of cheer. It can be a very contained kind of cheer, happiness. It can be an exciting kind of happiness. It can be so many different kinds of moods that you will be able to create with the change in sequence. And that is one part of the raga structure. The other thing that makes a raga distinct from just a scale or a sequence formula is the kind of oscillations and the ornamentation that are inbuilt or embedded within the raga. So in Hindustani music, you have typical oscillations like the glide, the meend, as they call it. In Carnatic, you have what is known as the oscillation of a note, and this oscillation is quite distinct from a vibrato or a tremolo or something like that, because it's sometimes it can be much wider amplitude. Now the major scale itself, I'll just show how the second, fourth, and sixth notes are oscillated. So the second is oscillated between the second and the third. Even the sixth is oscillated like that. And if you notice, the seventh is given a force which propels it almost to the next note. So it's almost on the higher tonic note itself. You don't play the seventh flat in this particular raga. You rarely play that seventh in a pure manner in Carnatic. You play the third in a pure manner many times, you just have the natural third, but very rarely the seventh will be played just naturally as such. It will be generally pushed almost to the force. So the ornamentation is a combination of grace and force in almost every system of music. It can either be grace or force. So the typical ornamentation gives each raga a different kind of flavor. Yes, sir.
You mentioned about this pulse in that tala, right?
Yes.
So what is that equivalent to in the tala? What is the sub thing of that?
No, see the typical, the technical term in Indian parlance is either nadai or gati. Gati is Sanskrit, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 is Chaturashram. Taka dhimi, taka dhimi, taka dhimi. All of these have technical syllables and all that. I'm just trying to demystify most of this for you right now using more simple terms. Takadimi, 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 takita, 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 takatakita, 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 takadimi, takita, 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 takadimi, takita. So all this is like 4, 3, 7, 5, and 9, known as Chaturashram, Tishram, Mishram, Khandam, Sankirnam. These are the different kind of pulse rates which are possible. These are the traditional pulse rates that are generally used in Indian music. Now you can also use, of course, people are using 11, 13 and other kinds of pulse rates also in certain compositions. That's a gati or nadai. Sanskrit gati means nadai in Tamil. Yes?
When you're improvising outside of the Carnatic tradition, such as like a song like we did yesterday, Lonely Woman,
Yeah.
How do you make your note choices? What sort of thought processes involved?
Well, when I play with musicians from other cultures, from diverse cultures, my natural inclination would be to see if it is like fitting into any kind of particular sequence pattern or what kind of sequence dominates. So I'll almost think of it like another raga. But many times if I identify one particular sequence, then I'll also know what notes are outside the sequence, so I'll have a fair idea of how the melody is. So that way I think Carnatic music, this is an objective statement, not because I come from the tradition. Having collaborated with a lot of artists, I think that Carnatic is probably the most complete melodic system. So the kind of grounding that you get melodically when you learn this system makes you pretty versatile enough to collaborate with almost any other kind of culture most of the times. When I say Carnatic, in this particular context, it includes the North Indian also. The raga system of music is very, very melodically complete. So but now when we played Lonely Women, we had almost freestyle kind of approach to it yesterday. So that one was more easy to do. But the other composition, the Domba Sachindi, there at least there are certain notes which was more like your pentatonic, one of the pentatonics, right? Or kind of things were there, so it was not difficult to identify and play. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the role of dance with Carnatic music?
See, I personally believe that till almost 1700, dance and music were pretty much close in the south of India. But then by 1700s, or rather later part of 1700s, pure music forms started getting more distinctive and started diverging from dance. So today the dance repertoire and music repertoire are pretty distinctive, with a couple of overlaps like padams or tilanas and javalis, so forth happening. But there is very much of a divergence today. That's why if you actually look at some composers before Tyagaraja and others who were more in the mid 1700s, people like Uthagadu Venkatakavi, a lot of his compositions who would be very, very extrapolatable to dance also, because he was much closer to that period when dance, drama, theater and music were pretty much integrated actually almost.
This is more a philosophical question. When you're a musician and you're practicing ragas and compositions, to what degree can you maybe over the course of your career, you over-rehearse to the point where the improvisation sounds rehearsed rather than having that kind of momentary brilliance that's the beauty of Carnatic music? Do you see that as a problem in Carnatic music? That sometimes, that it sounds, it's improvisational, but it's over-rehearsed and not kind of spur of the moment?
I would say that that's not a problem only with any one particular system of music. I think in any system of music, you have to have the fine balance between the necessary amount of practice for command and control, but not to compromise your personal enjoyment or the spontaneity and the freshness of the thing for yourself first. So even in, say, piano or something, now if you really keep practicing mechanically just the finger only to develop muscle memory, then only your muscle will be playing the music, not your mind. So that's, so the passion has to still be kept up, and that's like a very difficult thing to really, unless you yourself figure it out, it's very difficult to have a formula for that, like a common formula. So each artist has to, when I play, if I practice for about 5-6 hours or 7 hours continuously at a stretch, the moment I start finding things too effortless, I stop. So there has to be just that 5%, 10% of effort still happening for you to really be in it. If it starts getting too effortless, it's almost mechanical. Then you are not even there. There has to be a certain amount of effortlessness, but probably about 90% effortlessness and 10% effort balance you ought to try.
Going back to the discussion or the response you had about collaboration, is it at all disorienting that Carnatic versus you so well at melodic structure? Is it disorienting when that melodic structure is not there, not the point, and in fact the source of structure is harmonic or something else? That seems to be I'm kind of curious about your statement that it trains you well, because I've seen more of a disorientation between.
No, see, you have to really understand two things here. The melodic approach and the harmonic approach are distinct, and they have their own rationale. Each one has its own, evolution, which has been over a period of time based on aesthetics, general aesthetics, individual aesthetics, common aesthetics, national, regional, cultural, all kinds of aesthetics come into play. The melodic combinations, from my experience, I have seen that almost any combination of notes played or heard successively can be made to work over a period of time. But when you start playing simultaneous notes, which is more harmony, when you start getting into polyphonic, vertical arrangement of notes, there are certain combinations only which can work better than the other combinations. And even that is, so many experiments keep happening all the time. You go outside this conventional combinations of the 3-note chords, and then you start doing so many other kind of things. But again, it takes time for the ears to start getting adjusted to that. Now, similarly, when you start listening to harmony with a melodic ear, so to speak, or melody with a harmonic ear, then you will start finding things which are disorienting or which are not resolved. And that's where my whole concept of mel harmony came in. That was the rationale when I started mel harmony. Actually, you guys can do a wiki search on mel harmony, which is a concept I started in 2000. My whole rationale was that people were hearing music with their culture and their, type of ears, and then they would actually find, suppose somebody from the West was hearing a melodic concert, he may find it pretty unidimensional with only 1 or 2 melodies happening at the same time with not much of vertical dimension. And similarly, to a person who was hearing Western music with a raga in mind, there would be so many notes which are going out of that particular sequence or out of the scale. But that will still be rationally applicable for that particular culture. So what I started doing is try to create this system of harmony with an emphasis on melodic roots. That's what mel harmony is. So that's where that I try to start reconciling that bridge, that difference, to create that bridge between these two oceans. But it's a very serious concept. So mel harmony has its own separate rules for harmony itself. Very, very rationally explainable, applicable rules. And so I've been collaborating with different orchestras like, say, BBC or Sacramento Symphony and different kinds of orchestras, or with jazz groups. So some of these compositions that I play are mel harmonic. So there is that element of vertical thing, but with the emphasis on structured rules of some of this thing. In fact, the Society for Music Theory conference in Boston in 2005, maybe I don't know whether you were there in that, Robert Morris, the chair of composing from Eastman School of Music, presented a paper on mel harmony. So it's a very interesting topic and subject.
I think we'll leave it there. Let's give a big round of applause for Scarff. you all very much.
Pleasure.